So I'm very pleased to introduce our first panelist, a discussant for the day, and it's Wade Grant. Wade is an elected band councillor with the Musqueam First Nation. He served as Assistant General Manager to the First Nation Pavilion at the 2010 Olympic Games on behalf of the 4 host First Nations, Lillooet, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. Over 242,000 people visited during the 17 days of the operation. There were First Nations cultural performances to try traditional First Nations foods and to meet and connect with First Nation people from across Canada. So it was quite an undertaking and quite a success for Wade. Wade also serves as, excuse me a moment here, as one of the co-chairs of the City of Vancouver's dialogue program right now between First Nations, urban Aboriginals, and immigrant newcomers. It's a very dynamic initiative that's going on now and about which you will be able to learn more. So Wade's presentation is reflections on sharing culture and advice for non-Aboriginal organizations in entering into this area. So with no further ado, introduce Wade.
Thank you, Tim. As Tim has mentioned, my name is Wade Grant. My traditional name is Tsal Akwilano. I am from the Musqueam Nation, whose traditional territory we are standing on today. For about 4,000 years, my ancestors have lived in the area that we now call Vancouver. And if you think about that and how long that is, the City of Vancouver just celebrated its 125th anniversary. So the City of Vancouver has only been around for 3% of the time in this area that my ancestors have lived here. Now, everybody looks at me and they say, well, you don't look native. And it's true, I'm only half Musqueam. My grandfather was an immigrant from China. He married my grandmother in the 1930s, and they had 4 children, and one of them was my father. My father is Howard Grant, and his ancestral name is Kayapalano, but his father was Hong Tim Hing, and he gave him a Chinese name as well. And my father's third name is Hong Mun Hing. And on my mother's side, my mother is a half Musqueam, and she's half Norwegian. Her mother was the daughter of immigrants from Norway. So I have a bit of understanding of what it's like to be Aboriginal, but also come from an immigrant community as well. It's why I'm there's an echo. It's so interested in the work that I do. And as Tim had mentioned, I'm working with the Vancouver Dialogue Sessions, where we're coming together as First Nations, local First Nations, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh, the urban Aboriginal community, because Vancouver has one of the largest urban Aboriginal populations in Canada, where Aboriginal people from across the country live in this city, and the new immigrants, so that we can come together and share our stories, share our histories, share our culture, so we can learn from one another who we are, how we got here, where we want to go. And I wanted to do that because I knew as I grew up as a half native, quarter Chinese, quarter Norwegian, I faced a little bit of misunderstanding from all sectors of life, not just off the reserve, but on the reserve. You know, I would face name calling, and people wouldn't understand wouldn't understand the Chinese culture, my background, but also off reserve. You know, I had people that would bug me about my native culture as well. And it wasn't just because they were mean-spirited. It was because there wasn't understanding. There wasn't an education. There wasn't an ability for people to come together and learn from one another. And when I was in high school at Point Grey Secondary School in Vancouver, you know, I never thought about it. I never thought about how so many people come to this country to look for a new life, to look for a better life. And they're not given the opportunity to learn about the First Peoples of Canada. They're not given the opportunity to get that education. When they come here, I know that there's very little educational material that's given to new immigrants, that's given to them when they become citizens of Canada. And even so, in our education system, when I was in high school, I remember thinking there's only one chapter in one book of a social studies class in grade 10 where they talked about Native people. And they only talked about Native people as a sort of homogenous unit where it's right across Canada. When you think about Native people, you think about just one large group, when in fact there are over 600 First Nations in this country, 203 alone in British Columbia, all with their own unique histories, their own unique cultures, their own unique languages. And they all have something that they want to give, something that they want to share. It's only been recently where we're able to do that, because in Canada, of course, as many of you know, Aboriginal people have faced many oppressive actions by government, many different ways that they tried to assimilate Aboriginal people. You know, the most obvious, of course, is the residential school system, where people as young as 3, 4, or 5 years old, children from Aboriginal, were sent to schools that were run by the church and funded by the government, where they would try to take the Indian out of the child to make sure that these Aboriginal children would become more European. They weren't allowed to speak their languages. They weren't allowed to celebrate their culture. And when they went home, they lost all that. Many of them did. And they also put in legislation where they banned the potlatch, and they banned the singing and the traditional culture of Aboriginal people. My friend, my cousin from Squamish, who sang this song here today, that wouldn't have been allowed in the 1920s, in the 1930s, because if he had done that, he would have been arrested and put in jail. His regalia would have been taken away from him and put in a museum somewhere. So those sorts of things have happened. But my ancestors, my elders, my cousin's elders, they persevered. They came through and they said, no, we want to celebrate who we are. We want to make sure that our culture is strong and thriving, because we've been here for so long, and we want to make sure that we pass that on to our children and our children's children. So now that I can pass on those songs, Maurice can pass his songs on to his grandchildren so that they can learn and sing those songs that have been sung for generation upon generation upon generation. And my son now sings and dances, and he has his own little drum. He's 2.5 years old, and his favorite place to go is the Longhouse, the place that we go down and sing songs. So it's now our opportunity. We're 1 or 2 generations removed from those oppressive legislation. So in my generation, and I hope a lot of young Aboriginal people think this way. I know my friend from Squamish think this way as well. Is that we want to share our culture. We want to share our history. We want people to understand who we are. We want people to learn our stories, learn our history in our own words. We don't want to allow other people telling our stories anymore. We don't want people to learn about Aboriginal people just by the 30-second soundbite on a radio station, or a 30-second news story on the local news, or one paragraph in a newspaper. As Aboriginal people, we didn't have the ability to write down our histories. We didn't have a written language. So what we did is we passed it on orally, and we shared it in small groups like this. And that's why I feel it's so important that I move forward and Aboriginal people move forward in these sort of sessions, in the dialogue sessions that I co-chair. Because in order for us to move past the misunderstandings, order us to move past where we have been in the past, we have to talk with one another. So for far too long, people have been learning about Aboriginal people and being given or have been making their own minds up, and hadn't had the opportunity to reach out to First Nations like the Musqueam, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, to come to their communities, to talk to them, to say, hey, I want to learn a little bit about you. I want to learn a little bit more. And as I've moved forward on these dialogue sessions, I've realized people just want that invitation. A lot of people just want to know that they are welcome in our communities. Because a lot of people thought, well, I don't know, Aboriginal people, the reserve is just sort of off limits. A lot of people didn't feel that they were welcome there. But as we move forward with these dialogue sessions, we're letting people know that our doors are always open. The Aboriginal Pavilion that I worked at last year during the Olympics was a perfect opportunity to welcome the world to educate them about Aboriginal people right across Canada, from British Columbia to Prince Edward Island. And we had the opportunity for them to share their stories. But we didn't just want to educate the people of the world. We wanted to educate the people of Canada. And most importantly, for me, I wanted to educate the people of Vancouver. Because the people of Vancouver, when I ask a majority of people when I walk on the streets, do you know where Musqueam is? They don't even know that there's an Indian reserve in the city of Vancouver. Our reserve is located just south of Southwest Marine Drive in South Vancouver. So it was the perfect opportunity to do that. And now the Aboriginal Pavilion is being moved down to Musqueam. It's being rebuilt there. And we want to continue on with that success. We want to continue on with that education. We want to bring people down to learn a little bit more about Musqueam, to learn a little bit more about the First Nations, to learn a little bit more about how we have persevered, how we have grown as a community, how we want to see ourselves in the future. And I see our future not just as the Musqueam people, but together with the new immigrants of Canada, with the older population of Canada, with everybody in Canada, because only then can we move forward past the grievances that we've had for so many years, past all those misunderstandings. So I hope that we can do that through those sorts of opportunities. Also the opportunities that we stand here, and I'm talking to each and every one of you here and online. So these are the opportunities that we've never had before. And I thank you, and I thank my friend here for coming and sharing our culture. And I hope that we can all move forward. And I hope that groups such as yourself reach out to First Nations, just pick up the phone, go call the Squamish First Nation, call the Musqueam Nation. We all are ready and willing to start teaching and listening and learning from each other. And I hope that we can one day, when I'm a little bit older and my son is older, he can be standing here, but he won't have to educate. We'll just stand here and we're sharing each other's cultures, and we'll all understand where we come from and where we're going, so he won't have to go through what my grandfather, my father, and myself, and my cousin's family has gone through. And together we'll make this place truly the greatest place on earth. So I want to thank each and every one of you for coming here and listening to a little bit of my history, who I am, and I hope that we can work together and move forward. So once again, Haichika in my language is thank you, and I raise my hands to each and every one of you as well.
Thank you.